I dragged myself home after a brutal day at work, feeling drained and irritable. The house was eerily quiet. "Emma," I called out as I climbed the stairs. "I'm back. I'll be down in a sec, Hunter," she called from upstairs. That nickname had been a running joke between us for years. We met at a costume party where I was dressed as a hunter warrior. I'd nearly bumped into her, and as I started to apologize, she cut me off, poking me in the chest and saying, "You're Hunter." I smirked and replied, "And I'm guessing you're Emma," which made her laugh. Turns out her name actually was Emma. From then on, we'd always been Hunter and Emma. For what I thought were 5 blissful years, we'd been married. I cracked open a beer, dropped onto the couch, and turned on the 6 o'clock news. The headlines had just started rolling when I heard her coming down the stairs. My jaw nearly hit the floor. She was wearing that little black dress I loved so much. It was short, grazing her mid-thigh, and while it didn't flaunt much cleavage, it was anything but modest. The backless design left no doubt she wasn't wearing a bra, and the way her chest moved as she walked told me everything I needed to know. To top it off, she was wearing the necklace I'd bought her for our anniversary just last month. I instinctively reached for my phone and snapped a picture, though I wasn't sure why. "Wow," I said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't know we had plans. Let me get changed." "Where are we going?" "We're not going anywhere," she replied coolly. "Ethan Fitzgerald invited me out for dinner and dancing. I'll probably be back late, so don't wait up." Ethan Fitzgerald. That name alone made my blood boil. He was the kind of guy who'd been banned from every company event for getting caught messing around with too many married women. "He's not like that," she had insisted before. "He just has a jealous ex who caused all the drama." I stared at her, my temper simmering. "Funny, because I'm a jealous husband, and I'm not about to let you go out with him." She rolled her eyes, that same dismissive gesture she used whenever I voiced an opinion she didn't want to hear. "I don't belong to you," she snapped. "You may not belong to me," I shot back. "But when we exchanged vows, we committed to each other. I thought that still meant something." "Oh, don't be so old-fashioned," she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's the 21st century. Nobody believes in that stuff anymore. Honestly, if it was such a big deal to you, we should have just gotten divorced ages ago." The word divorce hit me like a ton of bricks. "Divorce?" I asked, stunned. "What are you even talking about?" She laughed dismissively, brushing past me. "Relax," she said, grabbing her clutch. "Order a pizza or something." Before I could say anything else, headlights flashed through the window as a sleek Lexus pulled into the driveway. Of course, it was Ethan. Something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I went to the closet, grabbed an old baseball bat, and followed her to the door. "Here comes Ethan," she called over her shoulder, clearly amused. "Don't wait up." "Emma," I shouted, stepping outside. As she turned around, I reached out and ripped the dress clean off her, leaving her standing there in nothing but a tight black thong and heels. She froze for a moment, stunned, before bolting back inside the house. I turned my attention to Ethan, who was still sitting in his car, undoubtedly debating whether to get out. I walked toward him, holding the bat loosely in one hand, tapping it lightly against my palm. That was all the encouragement he needed. His tires screeched as he tore out of the driveway, leaving skid marks behind. I turned to see a few neighbors peeking out from their windows, clearly enjoying the spectacle. I gave them a quick nod and walked back inside, putting the bat away in the closet. Grabbing another beer. My first one had gone warm. I sank back onto the couch and waited for the fallout. It didn't take long. Emma came storming downstairs in a robe, her face twisted with rage. She launched into a tirade, her voice rising and falling as she hurled accusations and insults, most of which barely made sense. "What were you thinking?" I finally asked when she paused to catch her breath. "What did you expect me to do?" "I don't know," she shouted, throwing her hands up. "Our lives have just gotten so boring, so predictable. We never have any fun anymore." I stared at her, stunned. Why am I only hearing about this now? Every time I try to change things up or plan something fun, You either shut it down, ignored it, or said it was dumb. And now this? Humiliating me in front of the whole neighborhood. I didn't want to lie, she said defensively. I figured if I told you, it wouldn't count as cheating. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Sleeping with someone else, whether you tell me or not, is still cheating. Well, maybe if I asked, you'd be okay with it, she said, her tone softening slightly, like she actually believed that nonsense. I stared at her, completely at a loss. You've lost your damn mind, I muttered. I need to get out of here before I do something we'll both regret. I grabbed my keys and left, heading straight to the bar. Michael, the bartender, handed me a cold beer before I even asked. Rough night, he asked. You have no idea, I muttered, recounting the night to him and my buddy Ben, who showed up halfway through my story. They both listened, shaking their heads in disbelief. After a couple more beers, I decided I'd better head home before I drank too much to drive. When I got back, the house was dark, and Emma was already in bed. I went through my usual routine, changed into pajamas, and climbed into bed, keeping my back to her. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought I heard her crying softly, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't face her, not after everything that had happened. The next morning, Emma was up early, cooking breakfast as if everything was perfectly normal. We sat across from each other at the table, the silence between us so heavy it was almost suffocating. Every now and then, I caught her glancing at me, but neither of us said a word until we finished eating and cleaning up the kitchen. Then she spoke. Michael, why can't you understand that things are different now? Nobody expects to be with just one person forever anymore. I set my coffee cup down and looked at her, my patience wearing thin. Well, I don't think I'm alone in thinking that's not true, I said, keeping my tone steady. And as for being with one person for life, neither of us was exactly a saint before we met. We both dated other people back then. Remember? You know that's not what I mean, she shot back, her voice growing sharper. We were kids then, Michael. We didn't know anything about life. Now we're older, more experienced, and we've had more to compare to. I don't need to compare anything, I said firmly. I did plenty of comparing before I asked you to marry me. I chose you because I knew you were the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. When you said yes, I thought you felt the same way. Was I wrong? Did you lie to me? No, I didn't lie, she said, her voice softening, but her hesitation told me there was more. But what? I interrupted, leaning forward. Have you changed your mind? If you have, then maybe we should just get a divorce and move on. I don't want a divorce, she muttered, her gaze dropping to the floor. Well, you can't have it both ways, Emma, I said, crossing my arms. If you don't want a divorce, you're going to have to forget about all this nonsense. Her shoulders sagged, and she whispered, I don't want a divorce. Then it's settled, I said, though deep down I didn't feel convinced. Even with Emma claiming she was done chasing other men, I couldn't bring myself to believe her. Every time she came home late or failed to call when she said she would, I felt a tight knot in my stomach. The tension between us hung like a storm cloud, growing darker with each passing day. Even in the bedroom, things felt cold and mechanical, like neither of us wanted to break some unspoken rule. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. The words came out before I had a chance to stop them. Emma, I want a divorce. She froze, her eyes wide with shock. But I thought we were fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you really think we're fine? I asked, my voice rising. Do you honestly believe we're anywhere close to what we used to be when things were good? Look at us, Emma. We're just going through the motions. She dropped her gaze, shaking her head slowly. Telling my parents was the hardest part. They didn't understand why we couldn't work things out. My father-in-law even called me to plead Emma's case. It wasn't until I showed him the photo of her half-dressed that he finally stopped pressing me to reconsider. There were questions from the family, too many to count. I tried to protect Emma from embarrassment at first, deflecting with vague excuses, but eventually, I had to show the photo and explain the situation. Her family turned on her almost immediately, Predictably, she came running to me, hoping for sympathy. "Michael," she said one evening, her voice trembling, "is there really nothing I can do to change your mind about the divorce?" I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my chin as I considered her question. After a long pause, I came up with an idea, one I was certain she wouldn't like. "Okay, Emma," I said finally, "I'll hold off on the divorce, but only on one condition." Her eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "Anything, Michael. Just tell me what you need. Be careful what you agree to," I warned her, my voice steady. "This is a big deal." "I'm not worried," she said with a small, confident smile. "I trust you." "What's the condition?" "You can date other men," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "But only if I can date other women." For a split second, I thought I saw a flash of amusement in her expression before she quickly masked it with a saccharine smile. "Of course, Michael. That's fair," she said, her tone overly sweet. What a piece of work, I thought. She probably assumed I'd never find anyone else. "There's one more thing," I added. "What is it?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "You can't start dating until I've found someone first." Her face lit up, practically glowing with excitement. She probably thought I'd never manage to find someone in time. To give her an extra nudge, I added, "If I can't find a date within 2 weeks, you're free to do whatever you want." Her smile widened, and she threw her arms around me. "Thank you, Michael," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "You'll see. This is exactly what we need to get back on track." "Maybe," I muttered under my breath, "or maybe this will just speed up the inevitable." A few days later, I casually mentioned that I had a date and suggested we make it a double date. The look of surprise on Emma's face was priceless, though she quickly composed herself. I could tell she thought I was bluffing, assuming she'd be out with Ethan while I stayed home alone. What she didn't know was that I'd already lined up a date of my own. On Monday, I took a long lunch to pick out some new clothes and left them in my car. By Friday, I left work early for a haircut, making sure I was home before Emma. I snuck into the guest room to get dressed and take a quick shower, finishing just as I heard the Collins door open. I shaved, brushed my teeth, and made sure everything was perfect before stepping out of the guest room. Emma turned to look at me, her expression unreadable as she took in my fresh haircut and new outfit. "Ethan will pick me up at 6:30, she said, her tone flat. "Fine," I replied casually. "We have a reservation with Sophia at 7 o'clock. The table's in my name, in case you get there before us." I walked out, feeling a small sense of satisfaction at her confusion. What Emma didn't know was that I'd asked out a new hire at work, Ava Collins. Ava was a striking redhead who had caught everyone's attention, though she carried herself with professionalism and class. Despite her occasional playful flirting, I had always made a point to flash my wedding ring. When I invited her for drinks after work, her intrigued expression was hard to miss. I arrived at the bar early, nursing a drink while I waited. When Ava walked in, she smiled warmly and slid into the seat across from me. "So, Michael," she teased, "what's got the last Boy Scout of America stepping out of his shell?" Her teasing faded the moment she saw my face. "Oh, Michael," she said softly, placing her hand on mine. "I'm so sorry. You look like you've lost your best friend." My chest tightened, and I looked away, blinking back tears. Ava moved closer, wrapping a comforting arm around my shoulders. She led me to a quieter table, waiting patiently while I gathered my thoughts and explained everything. When I finished, she gave me a serious look. "There's only one thing to do," she said firmly. "And what's that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Fix it," she replied, her gaze steady. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. A small, weary laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. I walked Ava to her car, and before parting, she handed me her number and gave me a quick, friendly hug. As she got into her car, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to take a turn I hadn't anticipated. The night had been an awakening of sorts, and as I drove home, I couldn't help but feel the stirrings of something new and exciting. When I picked Ava up for our next date, I barely had time to get out and open her door before she was standing beside me. She was a bit taller than Emma, though still shorter than me, and she looked stunning in her emerald green dress. The fabric hugged her curves perfectly, and the high slit running up the side gave a glimpse of her toned thigh. Her wavy red hair cascaded down her back, and the neckline of her dress revealed more cleavage than I'd ever seen from Emma. As I helped her into the car, she stumbled slightly, which gave me a tantalizing glimpse of her smooth, creamy thigh before she adjusted her dress. She flashed me a bright, confident smile, her green eyes glinting with amusement. "We'll have plenty of time for that later," she teased, her voice smooth and playful. Her words caught me off guard, and I had to collect myself before starting the car. She laughed lightly as I fumbled with the keys, and to my surprise, she rested her hand on my thigh as I drove. It took all my focus to keep my eyes on the road and not on the warmth of her touch. Thankfully, we reached the restaurant before things got out of hand, and I managed to pull myself together. When we walked in, Emma and Ethan were already seated. I had seen Ethan a few times before, but he wasn't worth noting. Emma, however, looked furious. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Ava, but she quickly masked her surprise. Ethan didn't bother standing, so I didn't offer a handshake. I simply nodded at Emma and helped Ava into her seat. Emma was clearly thrown off by Ava's beauty and elegance, and for once, she seemed to hold back whatever snide comment she wanted to make. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't stop staring at Ava's cleavage until Emma elbowed him sharply. Dinner began awkwardly. There was tension at the table, but eventually, conversation flowed, and it felt like any other dinner out, except for the underlying undercurrents of rivalry. Afterward, we went to a club for drinks and dancing. The upbeat music and lively crowd lightened the mood, but when the slower songs played, Ava pressed herself against me. I could feel Emma's eyes on us, her glare practically burning a hole in the back of my head. Meanwhile, Emma was grinding against Ethan, trying to provoke a reaction. Her movements were exaggerated, drawing attention from everyone around. She seemed oblivious to the spectacle she was creating until Ethan slid his hand up her dress and began caressing her chest. I felt secondhand embarrassment watching the scene unfold. Ava and I returned to our table, shaking our heads as we watched the chaos. The manager soon intervened, speaking quietly but firmly to Emma and Ethan. Emma bolted to the table, her face streaked with tears. She grabbed her coat and stormed out, Ethan following closely behind. "Well," Ava said with a giggle, "you certainly know how to show a girl a good time." I couldn't help but laugh, and we returned to the dance floor. By the time we left, the night felt surreal. Before heading out, I approached the manager to apologize for the scene. "I'd like to apologize for our companions," I said, trying to keep things professional. The manager waved me off. "No complaints here. I understand. Please come back again." When I dropped Ava off at her apartment, I walked her to the door. I intended to give her a quick, friendly kiss goodnight, but she surprised me by pulling me into a deep, passionate kiss. "Would you like to come in for a nightcap?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with a mix of mischief and invitation. I could tell she had more in mind than just a drink, and I wasn't about to argue. Inside, she guided me to the couch. Her dress caught the light as she moved, the slit revealing a hint of her leg as she adjusted herself beside me. Her confident smile sent a thrill through me, and as she leaned in closer, the tension between us was undeniable. She slid down to her knees, her movements deliberate and teasing, unbuttoning my trousers with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The warmth of her touch was intoxicating, and I couldn't help but compare this moment to what I'd experienced with Emma. Emma had always dismissed these kinds of encounters as degrading, but Ava didn't seem to share that view. For her, this was about connection, not control. Afterward, as we lay together, she nestled against me, resting her head on my shoulder. A thought suddenly hit me. "Ava," I said hesitantly, "I forgot to use a condom." She looked up at me, her expression calm. "It's okay," she reassured me. "I'm on the pill." I cupped her face in my hands, kissing her softly. Our lips moved in harmony, and I lost track of time. It felt like only moments passed before we drifted into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, we followed a simple routine, showering separately before I prepared breakfast. When she saw the meal I'd put together, she grinned. "Well, it looks like you've got more than one talent," she said teasingly. I could get used to this. We ate together, the mood light and playful, but I couldn't ignore the weight of my thoughts. As we finished, I spoke up. "Ava, I really like you," I began. "Last night was the most alive I've felt in years, but I need to sort out my marriage first. Even if Emma and I get divorced, I don't think I'll be ready for something serious right away." She reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. "Don't worry, Michael," she said gently. "I like you too, but you're right. You need to deal with Emma first. If things work out between us, I'm willing to wait." After breakfast, we talked about lighter topics, letting the conversation flow easily. When I left, I felt more grounded, though I knew I had a lot to face at home. When I walked in, Emma was at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy and red from crying. Seeing me in such a relaxed state seemed to upset her even more. She broke into tears again, sobbing into her hands. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "So," I said calmly, "how was your night with Ethan?" "Oh, Michael," she sobbed. "It was awful. I couldn't stop thinking about you and Ava. She's so perfect, and I feel like I can't compete with her." "You wouldn't have to compete if you hadn't started this mess in the first place," I replied, my tone measured but firm. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered. "Part of me wants to start over, but then I look at you and I see the man I married, the man I still love. I don't see someone cruel, just someone I hurt." Her vulnerability was clear, and I could see the hope flickering in her tearful eyes. "I'm going to step out for a while," I said, needing to get some air. "When I come back, we'll talk again." "Please don't make me leave, Michael," Emma pleaded, her voice trembling. "How can we fix this if we're apart? I need you now more than ever." "You don't get it?" I replied, my frustration finally bubbling to the surface. "It's not just about us getting back together. Maybe you should have thought about how much you needed me before you decided to do all this." I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her sitting at the table. When I came back down a little while later, she was still there, watching me intently, her eyes full of desperate hope. I shook my head sadly and walked out of the house, determined to let her feel the weight of the situation we were facing. I wandered down to the Charles River, the cool breeze doing little to soothe my tangled thoughts. I sat on a bench, watching the rowers and sailboats glide over the water. The sight was calming, but it couldn't distract me from the deep sadness weighing on my chest. I had always imagined building a family with Emma, and now that dream seemed impossibly far away. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, but as the sun began to set, I took a deep breath and slowly made my way back home. When I stepped through the door, Emma was still sitting at the table, her posture tense as she watched me closely. I didn't say a word. I just shook my head and walked upstairs, locking the door to my room behind me. Fully dressed, I lay on the bed and draped my arm over my eyes, trying to block out the turmoil in my mind. I don't know how much time passed before a soft knock broke the silence. "Michael?" came her quiet voice from the other side of the door. I didn't respond. After another tentative knock, I heard her footsteps retreating down the hallway. Once I was sure she was gone, I got up, showered, and tried to calm my restless thoughts. It didn't work. Sleep that night was fitful at best. The next morning, I went downstairs and found Emma in the kitchen. She had made breakfast, the scent of bacon and eggs filling the air. Surprisingly, I was hungry despite everything, but Emma barely touched her food. "Michael," she said hesitantly, her voice uncertain, "do you think we could try seeing a psychologist?" Her suggestion caught me off guard, and I paused to think. I wasn't sure how counseling worked, and part of me worried that the therapist would try to guilt me into reconciling or push me to see things entirely from Emma's perspective. But deep down, I wasn't ready to give up. My time with Ava had shown me that my relationship with Emma had grown stale. The question I had to ask myself was whether I truly wanted to try to rekindle what we had or move on. "Okay, Emma, here's the deal," I said, my tone firm. She nearly jumped out of her chair. I don't want a counselor whose only goal is to save our marriage. Whether it can be saved or not isn't the point. I won't tolerate any hidden agendas. I could see a flicker of disappointment cross her face, as if she had hoped for someone who would insist we could fix everything. But after a moment, she nodded. The consultation turned out to be surprisingly productive. Emma was forced to confront how her unwillingness to communicate had driven a wedge between us, and I realized I needed to be more assertive about my needs. We had honest conversations about what we wanted from each other, and it became clear that our issues weren't just about sex or attention, they were about a lack of connection. Despite our progress, Emma couldn't seem to let go of her insecurities about Ava. Even after I reassured her that while I had feelings for Ava, it was more a reaction to our situation than anything deeper, she couldn't fully accept it. Eventually, we both came to the painful but necessary conclusion that we needed to part ways. The divorce was finalized, and I took some time to reflect on my life. I didn't reach out to Ava right away. Instead, I booked a trip to a bed and breakfast on the Amalfi Coast. The weather was unpredictable, and so were my emotions, but the solitude helped me sort through my thoughts. When I returned, I called Ava. We met for dinner, and though we ended up spending the night together, it felt like more than just passion. It was about comfort and rediscovering a sense of direction. The next morning, as we lay in bed, Ava turned to me with a teasing smile. "Penny for your thoughts, Michael?" she asked. I took a moment before answering. "I was just thinking how easy it would be to ask you to stay with me, to make this permanent. But I know the easy way isn't always the right way." Her smile softened, and her teasing tone shifted. "Michael, I really like you," she said. "And I know I could fall for you, but with your divorce so fresh, I think it would be unfair to both of us if we rushed into something serious. I think we should see other people for a while, even if we keep seeing each other. I can't promise how long this will last, and I won't ask you to wait for me." I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew she was right. After we got up, we showered separately and had a quiet breakfast together. The tension between us was palpable, but neither of us gave in to the temptation to ignore what we just discussed. After we finished cleaning up, Ava walked me to the door and hugged me tightly. "I think this is goodbye," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "No," I replied firmly, pulling back to look at her. "Let's meet for dinner in 2 weeks, just to check in and see where we're at." She nodded slowly, kissed me on the cheek, and guided me out the door. As the door clicked shut behind me, I felt a strange finality, like something vital had been taken away. I couldn't help but wonder if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The rest of the week, I questioned everything. On Friday, I joined some friends for dinner and drinks, hoping to take my mind off things. We were sitting in a corner booth when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, Ava, walking in with a tall, handsome man. Of course, he was tall and handsome. My chest tightened, and I felt torn between walking over to say hello or respecting our agreement. In the end, I stayed put, though it stung to see her moving on so quickly. When she went to the restroom, I quietly left some cash on the table and said goodbye to my friends. I guess you could call me a coward. I was angry at Ava for dating so soon, but I was angrier at myself for expecting anything different. I knew I needed to move forward, not linger in the past. By the next Friday, I had arranged a date with Hannah Brooks, a secretary for one of my clients. We'd exchanged flirty banter before, and when I told her about my divorce, she didn't hesitate to say yes. Hannah had always struck me as attractive, but when she opened the door that evening, I was taken aback by how stunning she looked. "Ready?" she asked, her grin teasing. "More than ready," I replied, helping her with her coat as we headed out. Dinner started lighthearted with the usual first date small talk, but before long we delved into the story of my divorce. Hannah listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to empathy. Over coffee and dessert, I decided it was time to be honest with her. "Hannah, I don't want to lead you on," I said. "Before my divorce was final, I started seeing someone, and now that it's over, things with her have gotten more serious. But we both agreed to take a step back, date other people for a while, and not rush into anything. I don't want you to think I'm just using you as a rebound, I explained. I'm open to whatever happens, but I'm not looking for something serious right now. Her response was understanding. Michael, this is just our first date. I'm not expecting anything heavy. I appreciate your honesty. Let's just see where it goes. The night went on, and we spent the evening getting to know each other better. It ended with a warm kiss and plans to meet again on Saturday. Meanwhile, I had dinner planned with Ava, and I wasn't sure how that would go. When she showed up, she looked as beautiful as ever. But as we ate, her mood shifted. You know I saw you the other night, right? She said after we'd placed our orders. I raised an eyebrow, curious. Saw me? Where? I saw you out with your friends, she said, her voice even. I was going to come over, but by the time I came back from the restroom, you were already gone. I felt a little self-conscious. I know we agreed to see other people, but seeing you with someone else so soon made me feel jealous. I know it's silly. Michael, you didn't need to feel that way, she said gently. Jack is an old friend. When he called, I decided to meet up with him. It wasn't anything more than that. No need to apologize. If I felt anything, it was all in my head, Ava said with a faint smile, then added with a teasing look. Should I be jealous now? I laughed softly. I wouldn't worry about that. We've got another night planned tomorrow, I said, trying to change the subject. We both agreed there were no commitments, just two people having a good time. That's nice, she said, but there was something a little wistful in her tone. You deserve to have a good time. We didn't dwell on it for long as our food arrived and we shifted to lighter topics. Later, I opened the car door for her. Would you like to go dancing? I asked. No, she replied softly. I think it's better if you just take me home. The drive was quiet. She stared out the window, lost in thought. When we reached her place, we shared a kiss that felt a little more intense than we intended, then parted ways. Please stay in touch, Michael, she said quietly. I will, I assured her. Good night, Ava, I said, getting in my car quickly before she could see the conflicted look in my eyes. My date with Hannah went well. The goodbye kiss was more passionate than I expected, and though we did some light petting, we agreed to stop before it went any further. I spoke with Ava every week or so, but we never saw each other again. Whether we were avoiding each other or it was just fate, I couldn't tell. I saw Hannah a few more times. We had fun, but there wasn't any real chemistry. After our third date, Hannah surprised me. Michael, I think this should be the last time, she said. What? I thought things were fine. Well, maybe they were 2 days ago, she said, sounding uncertain. Michael, when we first started, we agreed there'd be no strings attached. I told you I wasn't looking for anything serious. I didn't have any feelings for you at the time, but now things are different. I'm starting to develop feelings. If we keep going, I think we might end up somewhere I'm not ready for. I'd rather cut it off now before it gets too deep and leads to more hurt. I hope that makes sense. Stung, but I understood. It didn't make it any easier, but I knew I'd get over it. I stood up, kissed her forehead, and walked toward the door. Good night, Hannah. Goodbye, Michael, she replied. Her sad smile and teary eyes said it all as I closed the door behind me. I thought about what to do next. I dated a few women, mostly short flings and brief relationships, but none of it led anywhere. Eventually, I realized what I was really missing and decided it was time to make a call. Hello, it's Michael, I said, realizing only after I spoke that she could see my caller ID. Ava, I'm done with the casual stuff. I'm ready to settle down. If you're willing, I want to come home. There was a long pause on the other end, and I felt a sudden pang of worry. Maybe I had missed my chance. How soon can you come? She asked. Ava had stayed in town, living quietly with her cats, and wasn't looking for anything else. I wasn't serious about her, but I still saw Hannah a few more times. We ended up in bed again, but the chemistry just wasn't there. After the third time, Hannah dropped the same bombshell again. Michael, I think this should be the last time, she said. What? I thought we were okay. I protested. Maybe too okay, she said, confusing me even more. Michael, we agreed there'd be no commitment at the start. I didn't have feelings for you, but now I'm starting to. If we keep going, it'll get to a place I'm not ready for. I'd rather end things now before it gets too deep and painful later. I hope this makes sense. It did, in a strange way. It hurt, but I knew I'd move on. I dressed, kissed her forehead, and walked toward the door. "Good night, Hannah." "Goodbye, Michael," she said, with that sad smile and those teary eyes. I closed the door behind me, unsure of what to do next. I had some short relationships, but none of them turned serious. Eventually, I realized what I was missing and picked up the phone. "Hello, it's Michael," I said, forgetting she could see my caller ID. "Ava, I'm done with the casual stuff. I've had more ups and downs than I can count, and I'm ready for something more serious. If you're still open to it, I want to come home." Another long pause, and I started to worry that I'd lost my chance. "How soon can you come?" she asked. Ava hadn't left town. She lived quietly with her cats, not seeking anything else. Though I wasn't particularly interested. I'd heard from mutual friends that she was dating, but nothing serious seemed to be happening. She'd even suggested inviting Emma to our wedding. I wasn't sure about it, but I didn't protest. Emma declined the invitation but sent a lovely gift. I was surprised when Ava started a casual friendship with Emma. They met for coffee, went shopping together, things I didn't think much of, though it did feel a little odd. About 6 months after we got married, I came home one night to find Ava all dressed up, ready to go out. "Oh, here we go again," I thought, but thankfully my worries were misplaced. "Go change," Ava said. "We're meeting Emma at Sophia for dinner. I know you two have gotten pretty close, but don't you think this is a bit much?" I asked. "Don't worry, dear. There's a method to my madness," she replied. I knew better than to argue when Ava had made up her mind, so I shrugged and went to change. By the time we arrived, Emma was already there, and the tension in the air was as thick as I expected. Ava and Emma exchanged quick cheek kisses, and I just stood there awkwardly, feeling like I didn't belong. Neither of us seemed to know what to do next, but Emma broke the silence first. "Michael, it's good to see you. You're looking great." "Thanks, Emma. You look good too," I said, trying to sound casual. Luckily, we were soon seated at our table. Ava paused to chat with the man behind the counter, and I turned to her when she returned. "What's all this about?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Don't worry about it, honey," she replied, flashing me a smile. Every husband knows that when his wife says nothing, it almost always means something, and that something is usually not good. But there wasn't much I could do except go along with it and hope for the best. Emma sat next to me with Ava across from her. Before we could even think about ordering drinks, the owner showed up with Jack in tow. Ava greeted him warmly, gave him a hug, and sat him down to my left, directly across from Emma. It quickly became clear that Ava had a plan, but thankfully my fears weren't materializing. Still, I knew things could change in an instant, but, to my relief, Emma and Jack hit it off, and the conversation flowed smoothly throughout dinner. By the time the night was over, it felt like we had all known each other for years. When it was time to leave, Jack and I split the bill. As Ava and I headed out, Emma and Jack decided to stay for a drink at the bar. Ava was so confident, but I couldn't bring myself to feel angry. Even though I knew things might not last, they clearly had a good start. We kept things polite with Emma and Jack, though we didn't see them much as a couple. When we did meet, it was usually in group settings. Their relationship seemed stable enough, and Emma no longer seemed to feel the need to stir things up. We wished them well, and Ava and I couldn't have been happier. Though I'll admit, the baby's kicks at night certainly kept her awake.